and welcome. You're on VITV with Into Vietnam Weekend, which provides you with the most comprehensive and in-depth views of Vietnam's economy in the past week. Top stories of the week. Vietnam enjoyed trade surplus of $863 million this year. The total retail sales and service revenues increased by 12.6% in the year. According to Decree 156, the State Bank of Vietnam will assume functions of the central bank next year. What are possible impacts of the changes in functions, power, and organization of the State Bank on the banking sector, as well as on the whole economy? Mr. Taret Mahmood, CEO of the ANZ in Vietnam, has the answer to the questions. Let's begin with this week's figures. The General Statistics Office said in its website Vietnam were estimated to run $100 million of trade surplus in December, resulting in a trade surplus of $863 million for the whole year. In details, Vietnam is expected to export $11.6 billion worth of goods this month, down 3.3% on month, but up 12.2% on year, while the country spent $11.5 billion to import goods and services, up 4.7% on month and 16.8% on year. In 2013, the country is estimated to reap a total of $132.2 billion from exports, increasing 15.4% versus 2012. This year, exports posted the lowest on-year growth in recent 3 years. The domestic economic sector contributed $43.8 billion, increasing 3.5% and accounting for 33.13% of the country's total export values. The foreign direct investment sector contributed $81.2 billion, increasing 26.8% on year and accounting for 61.4% of the country's total export turnovers. European Union countries continue being the country's largest export market this year with $24.4 billion, making a year-on-year increase of 20.4% or $4.1 billion in absolute value. The US ranked the second with $23.7 billion, making a year-on-year increase of 20.3% or $4 billion. ASEAN market came third with $18.5 billion, increasing 6.3% on year or $1.1 billion. In terms of import, in 2013, the country was estimated to spend a total of $131.3 billion to buy goods and services, increasing 15.4%. China continued to top the list of Vietnam's importers in the year with $36.8 billion or 26% of the country's total import values, up 26.7% on year or up $7.8 billion. The ASEAN market came the second with $21.4 billion, up 2.8% on year. Korea came third with $20.8 billion, up 34.1%. For the whole year, Vietnam ran a trade surplus of $863 million, or 0.7% of total export turnovers. The domestic economic sectors incurs a trade deficit of $13.1 billion, while FDI sector runs $14 billion of trade surplus. The General Statistics Office announced total lending of the banking system as of December the 12th stood at 8.83% and is expected to surpass 2012's level, but lower than the whole year target. The total money supply, or M2, increased by 14.64%, while deposit hit 15.61%. The General Statistics Office also revealed liquidity of commercial banks have been improved, and thanks to that, payment of the system was ensured, while foreign exchange rate remained stable and forex reserve were at high levels. It was reported that business efficiency of credit institutions was lower than previous years. The total profit in the first 11 months of this year increased only 3.2% over the same period last year, mainly due to harsh impacts of economic conditions. The gap between lending and deposit interest rates was narrowed, while capital for provision for risk increased as the quality of property decreased. Vietnam's Index of Industrial Production, or IIP, in 2013 is estimated to increase by 5.9% on year. In details, processing and manufacturing sector increases by 7.4% this year, much higher than 5.5% growth of 2012. Production and distribution of electricity sector jumps by 8.5%, and water supply, sewage and waste management soared by 9.1%, but mining and quarrying sector eases 0.2%. This year, industrial production shows signs of recovery, especially in the processing and manufacturing industry, which has shown significant growth over the quarters. The GSO says the country IIP rise by 5% in the first quarter of the year. The figure is 5.5%, 5.4% and 8% for the second, third and last quarter. Coming up next is some major macroeconomic and investment news. Vietnam's total retail sales and service revenues were estimated to have increased by 12.6% on year to 2,618 trillion dong, or $123.4 billion in 2013, the lowest growth level in recent 4 years. The rise would be 5.6% if price hike is excluded. Of the sum, the state-owned economic sector contributed 258.6 trillion dong, or 9.9% of the country's total retail sales and service revenues, down 8.6% from 2012, while the non-state-owned sector contributed 2,269.5 trillion dong, or 86.7% of the country's total retail sales and service revenues, up 15.3%. The foreign direct investment sector contributed 89.8 trillion dong, or 3.4%, up 32.8% on year.
Commercial banks are expecting a sharp increase in overseas remittances as 2013 draws to a close, estimating a yearly total approaching $11 billion, ranking among the 10 highest overseas remittance recipients in the world. Labor market recoveries in the US, Australia and Canada, and many other countries where Vietnamese nationals are residing have considerably increased remittances this year. Unemployment rates in many countries have been cut in half over 2013, creating stable employment conditions for Vietnamese nationals and enabling wage remittances to relatives or investment in the homeland. The Vietnamese government has preferential policy intended to encourage overseas Vietnamese to send money back home. Remittances recipients were allowed to withdraw money in Vietnam dong or US dollars without paying income tax. Stable exchange rates have encouraged some recipients to convert US dollars into Vietnam dong and thus enjoy higher interest rates. Remittances are primarily used for short-term business production, real estate projects, and to cover household expenditures.
Vietnam's Index of Industrial Production, or IIP, in 2013 is estimated to increase by 5.9% on year. In details, processing and manufacturing sector increases by 7.4% this year, much higher than 5.5% growth of 2012. Production and distribution of electricity sector jumps by 8.5%, and water supply, sewage and waste management soared by 9.1%, but mining and quarrying sector eases 0.2%. This year, industrial production shows signs of recovery, especially in the processing and manufacturing industry, which has shown significant growth over the quarters. The GSO says the country IIP rise by 5% in the first quarter of the year. The figure is 5.5%, 5.4% and 8% for the second, third and last quarter. The stock market of Vietnam witnessed a record 37 companies delisted from exchanges this year compared to 22 delisted stocks in 2012. Of those, 5 stocks were delisted after merging and restructuring. and 13 stores were delisted after reporting losses for 3 consecutive years or due to their aggregate losses exceeding their equity. Of note, 4 companies were forced to be delisted due to violating regulations when they did not publish financial information. In related news, the State Securities Commissions have approved Service Securities being dissolved in accordance with the law of enterprises. The Municipal Tax Department has reported that Hanoi collected over 162 trillion dong, or $7.7 billion in taxes this year, 0.3% higher than its annual target. The figure included more than 10.9 trillion dong, or $519.8 million from import-export, and over 151.1 trillion dong, or $7.2 billion from domestic trade activities. The department attributed the achievement to its tightened supervision over businesses that are in tax areas, popularization of tax regulations, and dialogues with businesses. It has also timely prevented and strictly dealt with tax frauds. For 2014, the city sector plans to intensify the dissemination of tax reform strategy from 2011 to 2020, along with boosting the application of information technology and organizing more dialogues with taxpayers so as to reach tax collection targets.
International tourist arrivals have risen to an all-time high, with more than 7.75 million so far this year, up 10.6% over the same period in 2012, and even higher than the target set for 2015. Of the huge visitor number, over 4.64 million came for tourist and leisure purposes, growing 12.2% year-on-year. Meanwhile, the other came to do business and visit relatives. In particular, the number of international visitors coming to Vietnam by air amounted to over 5.98 million. Regarding the markets, China is still the biggest visitor-generating market, with more than 1.9 million travelers, leaping 33.5% from the same period last year. Other large markets such as Japan, South Korea, the US, and Taiwan post either slight growth or decline against last year. Russia, an emerging market in recent years, is still the market with the most impressive growth, at up to 71.1% this year. The Vietnam National Administration of Tourism reports that the local tourism industry targets around 8 million foreign visitors next year. The Tourism Authority will carry out around 50 activities inside and outside the country to promote Vietnam's tourism image, most of which will be fairs and promotions in traditional markets like Japan, South Korea, China, Taiwan, and larger ones such as the Middle East, Russia, Eastern Europe, and India.
According to the Hanoi Stock Exchange, ending 2013, the bond market has some new records. In the primary market, the HNX has successfully mobilized for State Treasury, the Vietnam Development Bank, Vietnam Bank for Social Policies, and local governments, a total of 190 trillion dong of bonds. The figure in 2012 was 167 billion dong. Most of this amount belongs to the State Treasury. In the secondary market in 2013, there is a new record in liquidity, with the average transaction of nearly 1.6 trillion dong per session, almost double that of 2012. And foreign trade news, we continue the program.
According to the recent Trade Councilors Conference, Vietnam will run a trade surplus of $20 billion with the U.S., when its export is estimated to surpass $25 billion mark. The figure is significant as export to the U.S. account for 20% of Vietnam's total export. It's forecast that Vietnam's export to the U.S. will grow by some 10% in 2014 to assist exporters to earn higher turnover and local negotiators in Trans-Pacific Partnership partnership deal, the Consular Office has informed the Ministry of Industry and Trade and concerned ministries and agencies about trade barriers imposed by the U.S. as well as the country's new policies on export. It also made in-depth studies on new laws and disseminated them to the circle of business players on a regular basis, making them aware of technical barriers and others involved. Vietnam recorded a trade surplus of $834 million with Malaysia in the first 11 months of 2013, according to the Office of Commercial Affairs at Vietnamese embassies in Malaysia. Two-way trade between Vietnam and Malaysia hit $8.31 million in the period, a rise of 13.83% compared to the same period last year, of which Vietnam export fetched nearly $4.6 billion. A year-on-year increase of 9.85%. Computers and electronics products topped the list of Vietnam exports as they brought home $1.1 billion, followed by crude oil $879 million, mobile phones and spare parts $596.5 million, and rubber $464 million. Meanwhile, Vietnam imported over $3.7 billion of goods from Malaysia, up 20.58% from a year earlier. The agricultural sector earned $2.31 billion from exporting agroforestry and fishery products this year, bringing the sector's total export value to $27.5 billion. However, major farm products such as rice, coffee, tea, and cassava saw considerable fall, both in value and volume due to global market fluctuations and adverse weather. The Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Development reported export earnings of major farm products fetched $13.1 billion, down 11.9%. Seafood exports notched up $6.7 billion, up 10%, and major forestry products generated $5.65 billion from exports, up 15.1%. Seafood is one of Vietnam's key exports, generating $6.7 billion in earnings. Vietnam is Asia's second-largest exporter of timber products, second only to China. Due to the U.S. imposition of dumping tariffs on Chinese exports, Vietnam's Timber and Forest Products Association or VForest says demand is expected to surge from September to December in the lead-up to the holiday season. According to VForest, the consumption of timber products seems inversely related, down by 20% on the domestic market, but up by 15% in export volume and value. VForest believes the wood processing sector's export target of $5.5 billion for this year, or 15% from last year, is within the reach. The General Department of Forestry say the wood processing industry grew at annual rate of 41 to 42% in the 2005-2010 period and 20 to 30% in the last 3 years. Its wood and timber shipments have reached more than 100 nations and territories.
Vietnam has undergone continuous financial shock in the past time, implying there are certain problems in the local financial system that has pushed forward a concern over whether the National Financial Supervisory Scheme has fulfilled its role. Relevant agencies have been assigned to use special tools in monitoring the market. However, the tools haven't met international standards, and at the same time, the supervisory committees haven't been given sufficient power. Currently, Vietnam is utilizing such standard safety regulations, including those related to capital, liquidity, payment capacities, business management, and risk management. But are they sufficient to ensure the safety of the current financial regulations and corridor? Mr. Vũ Viết Ngoạn, chairman of the National Financial Supervisory Commission, raised the concern in the International Conference on Enhancing the Supervision and Increasing the Soundness of the Financial System.
Nhiều nước trên thế giới đã ban hành nhiều tiêu chí để định dạng tập đoàn tài chính quy mô lớn có nguy cơ gây rủi ro hệ thống và áp dụng các chuẩn mực an toàn và cơ chế giám sát riêng cho nhóm định chế này. ở Việt Nam có các quy chuẩn an toàn cho hoạt động của nhóm định chế này hay chưa?
In fact, Vietnam's regulation on financial security in the banking sector, which constitutes as much as 92% of the sector, only meets the Basel I standard, which dates back to 1992, while other countries have applied the Basel II level and striving for Basel III-1, which regulates tougher requirements on capital and provisions for risk.
In doing so, we will stress the need to assess accurately the stock of NPLs. We will stress the need to design and implementing an effective debt workout scheme. These two elements have been present in every successful restructuring program around the world. And to ensure sound flows of finance in the future, we're going to stress in particular two sets of measures.
It's easy to recognize that there's a big gap between Vietnam's and the world financial security standard requirements.
Tiêu chuẩn tài chính của Việt Nam thì nó còn xa so với tiêu chuẩn tài chính của thế giới về rất nhiều mặt, cả về kế toán lẫn cả về áp dụng những các cái chuẩn mực. Thì tỷ lệ nợ xấu như thế nào là nợ xấu thì cũng đang còn có điều rất xa. Cho nên tôi nghĩ rằng cái hệ thống tài chính của Việt Nam bây giờ thì có thể là đã có an toàn hơn, nhưng bảo rằng nó đã thực sự an toàn chưa thì tôi nghĩ rằng trên thế giới này khó có ai có thể bảo đảm rằng là một cái hệ thống tài chính nào nó thực sự là an toàn.
Experts agree that the financial security standards in Vietnam is insufficient and relevant agencies have not been given the required power in monitoring the system.
And I would even say you need financial development for financial soundness as well. For example, you need a diversified financial system to ensure a stable financial system. A financial system that is excessively bank-based tends to not to be a stable financial system. So these two concepts go hand in hand. This diagram also shows that there is something to the right of this block. What is at the right of this block? Is financial soundness an objective per se? Is it the final objective? And the answer is no.
After the international financial crisis in the past time, a lot of countries have promptly revised the financial system by passing regulations which give more independence and power to their supervisory commissions, enhancing the collaboration between relevant agencies, increasing the coordination between macro and microeconomic supervision, and establishing the framework for supervision, such as the Committee for Financial Sustainability. If Vietnam does not meet the roadmap, it will miss valuable chances to strengthen the financial system and also miss the chance to integrate international financial markets. The Vietnamese government has issued Decree number 156 regulating function, task, powers, and organization structure of the State Bank of Vietnam. Accordingly, the State Bank of Vietnam is a ministry-level agency assuming functions of the central bank. What are possible impacts of the changes in function, power, and organization of the State Bank on the banking sector as well as the whole economy? Let's find out in our talk with Mr. Taret Mahmood, the CEO of the ANZ in Vietnam.
Thank you very much for participating in our program today. The 2013 is coming to an end, and recently the Vietnamese government had issued on the banking sector as well as the whole economy.
Sure, I think it's a very good next step on Vietnam's structure of how it manages the banking system and monetary policy by taking this step of giving the state bank clear authority and accountability for managing inflation. Because I think one of the biggest risks in Vietnam's last 20 years has been periods of high inflation. Have a more consistent policy and implementation policy to manage inflation. This will allow Vietnam not to go through the big cycles, but just steady growth to give the Vietnamese investors and foreign investors stability when they make their decision. And it attracts the right type of investor when you have stability.
One of the newest points of the decree is to give the SPV more powerful function in setting up and managing the inflation target. However, it seems not to be done if SPV has to belong to the government. What would you say about that?
I think we're fortunate right now because the alignment between the government as well as the state bank is very strong. I think the danger in the future is if the state bank is not given the independence to manage inflation, it could be influenced by the government to maybe have high in the best interest of the economy. So going forward, I think the more independence the state bank can have in measuring and monitoring and executing guidelines.
State Bank of Vietnam has been given more independence and power in regulating the circulation of the Vietnam dong. Do you think the move risks?
Yeah, well, what's happened in the last 2 years has been phenomenal. I think the state bank has done a really amazing job in providing stability. So you look at interest rates in Vietnamese dong. For 1 month, if you look 2 years ago, the rate was 14.8%. Today, it's about 4.8%. So a 10% drop in just 2 years, which is a big change for the economy. So companies that need to borrow, who are good, they can borrow much cheaper than they could 2 years ago. In addition, the state bank has done a good job in reducing the foreign currency lending, because that's risky. If you borrow in foreign currency, but your income is in Vietnamese dong, you have a risk on the currency. So I think by reducing foreign currency, and it de-risks the economy from any shock on the currency market.
Which areas could be seen to change from the newest decree?
I think what it will do is it just gives a bit more independence to the state bank, but also now shifts the focus to the other ministries and the other tools for economic development. So monetary policy is one tool, and managing FX and managing interest rates and inflation is one part of the story. The rest of the story is fiscal spending and fiscal tax collection and how the budget is spent. The other part is the ease of doing business. How easy is it for you to set up a business and to get a license? And those parts, I think that's really now the next part of Vietnam's story has to shift away from what the state bank has to do, because I think they've done a good job, to now what does the rest of the private sector and the public sector, what do we have to do to drive growth?
Once again, thanks a lot for being with us today.
And as usual, the final part is the summary of the local securities market. And that's all for now. Thank you so much for watching. For comments and feedbacks, you can reach us by email at intovietnam@vitv.vn or give us a call at 0422208288. Goodbye for now.